8:30, Bruce, James, and Lindsay Mack, not to be confused with Lindsay Abbott. Rather a small agenda today. I've got to be gone by 9 because I have a specialist appointment down the hospital. So if we go up to that time, I was going to call him my lieutenant, but I won't now. Our speedy expert down here will deputise and take over. So we'll just work quickly through the agenda on the routine matters. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Nobby Bruce here. Look, I have been talking, I'm not talking, I've been texting with Richard Hardy today, and James is in substitute for him. Richard's had to go to cautionary work at Bulla this morning.
Well, that's one step better than going to the Antarctic, I suppose, isn't
it? You're probably right.
Yeah,
anyway, James, I'd like us to welcome James, but just recognise Richard's Richard's been otherwise engaged.
Yep, thank you. And I see James on Zoom anyway. Do we have anything from Claire from Lindsay Abbott?
Councillor Abbott has apologised for all meetings this week.
Okay.
Councillor Abbott is not a member of this group.
Just raise that because he was going to report back on an issue. Yep, that's fine. Any notification of urgent business? There being nothing, we'll just move on to the agenda and the minutes from the previous meeting. So if somebody who was present would like to welcome your worship, would like to recommend that be accepted.
Happy to move.
Thank you. A seconder. Were you here? No, you weren't. Jeff, you're going to put your hand up now.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Please pay attention.
My apologies.
Is there any discussion or matters arising from the previous minutes? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. Moving on to the project update report, and I take this is your area of expertise, Jane.
Thank you, Nobby. As we said, it's a reasonably short agenda. I think there's 3 key items in this report that the group will want to focus on. These are supporting the Mayor's Working Group, which is Section 3, incorporating the Charter work in Section 4, and the 6-monthly review in Section 5. So perhaps we move to page 7 and Section 3, Mr. Chair. Would that be the way to go?
Yeah, that'd be fine, thank you.
And there's a paragraph there which we'll take as read. And as you've already said, a verbal update will be provided at the meeting. I'm not sure who's going to do that.
Yeah, I can probably help with that, Jane. At the chair's meeting on Monday, I asked His Worship whether he was still interested in this group, and he gave an undertaking at that meeting that he would ring the councillors concerned. I think there were 4 or 5 councillors named to gauge their support for a formal or informal support group. So I don't know where that's gone to, and I might ask His Worship if he's had any result in that area, because that group just seems to linger and we don't seem to be going anywhere. So Tim, have you made contact with those elected members who potentially were going to be in that group that supported you? I think it was Skelp, Arnold, Abbott, Graham Lewis. I've missed one.
Councillor Ludlow.
Oh, Ludlow, yes, thank you. How did you get with that, Tim?
No, it was a lot harder than I thought, because the meeting that we had all through yesterday, and it also, I realised then how difficult it is to get a group of that size within a short period of time, and that I suppose one of the reasons is that I don't have a PA except for the 12 hours or 14 hours, I think they've allowed me to have staff help. But I'm prepared to make a list of all the help that I need in greater detail.
Just to help clarify it for your perspective, Jane, I might ask Councillors Skelt and Lewis whether they got a telephone call from the Mayor since Monday on the issue.
I haven't received one.
No, that's all right.
Chairman.
I haven't received one.
No. And so, Jane, I guess this is we're back to square one where we were at before about, and I will ask Lindsay, who's on Zoom shortly, to talk to this potentially as well, is, what's the benefit to be gained by keeping this group going? I've worked considerably behind the scenes to try and get a support group up and running for the Mayor so that he feels supported at work. I did that informally to start with the councillors mentioned, and I got a very positive response. It's fair to say that following discussion with that group of councillors, there was a media release by the Mayor which unhinged the support for from that group from some members who felt a bit betrayed by it. And so I guess it's whether we keep that group going and what support there will be for it. At the Chair's meeting, when I asked on Monday His Worship whether he wanted to continue to have that group, he said yes, but he was quite definitive that he didn't want any of the members of the Chair's group to be involved. So that excludes me, and because of my relationship issues, I guess, with him. And so we left it in his ballpark, in his domain, to ring round and find out whether there was going to be support and whether that support would be informal or formal. So I guess that's where we got to, Jane, and it doesn't help your scenario because we just keep pushing this issue out.
Yes.
And I think the last thing to comment about that, which we did talk about at the Chairs group as well, was even if we had that group of support formally in the system, what goals and outcomes and measures are we going to put in place? So how will we know that we're getting any traction, or is it just a bit of a talk fest? And so that was the sort of second layer that kicked in as well.
So can I just, Mr. Chair, just suggest that we go back to what was discussed at the last meeting, that Councillor Abbott was to be requested on behalf of PTG to talk to those, and on that basis.
Yes, I did both ring and email Lindsay, but as you'll know, he's had a bereavement in the family recently, and I think he's not been well either.
Okay.
So whether he's had difficulty around that, I'm not sure. I've tried to contact him again the last couple of days, just to express my regrets about it, but also to catch up with him, and I haven't had a response, which is unlike Lindsay. He normally does.
Can I suggest then that we seek for Councillor Abbott to report to the next Chairs group?
Okay.
Can I support that? I think now that you've made that comment, Councillor, it reduces that group to 4 because one of the members who volunteered is a member of Chairs group, so that reduces it to 4, which changes what the Mayor said about it being a too large group. So I think it's quite valid that we go back to asking Councillor Abbott to see what he can arrange.
Claire's got a mouth half open, so just before she says something, just for your benefit, Leslie, I wasn't part of this group. I just coordinated to start with the names. So with me being out, it's
one of
still
the
a group of 5.
Is group.
Yep.
So that reduces the group down.
Sure.
By
Claire.
1.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I don't believe Councillor Ludlow was ever included. The Chair's group notes Councillors Kett, Abbott, Lewis, Skelt and Arnold.
Yes. Yep,
I don't believe there was ever a discussion about Councillor Lewis.
No, there wasn't.
I am aware that Councillor Abbott has had no contact with His Worship for the last 2 months.
Okay.
Through you, Chair, I just wanted to try and expedite taking Mr. Grant's point that when there's 2 of us here today, His Worship could take the opportunity after this meeting and discuss it with us.
Yep.
To try and progress the process.
Sure.
From a personal point of view, I'm still very happy to support the Mayor either informally or formally, but I think we need to expedite the process if indeed it's going to happen. So,
Sure.
So, Mr Chair, can I be presumptuous and ask, could we move that request to Councillor Scout to have that discussion this afternoon and report back through the Chairs group next week?
Happy for that to happen. Yep.
as long as Councillor Abbott is okay.
He will be fine. I am sure he will be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for that, Councillor. Righto, Jane, that's here's some
The first one. The next one headed up section 4 of the council charter, and you'll recall that last time the group asked that we make sure that the work of the around the council charter be incorporated into this project. We've noted there to make sure, and it is in fact one of the foundation documents, but we don't want anything to fall between the cracks and keep the momentum going. We were provided with some notes from the session, so I wasn't, nor was the Secretariat, party to any of the workshops, but we were at pains in these bullet points not to change any of the wording from the notes. That's why it might look a little bit cumbersome, but hopefully there's the 7 bullet points there. If we could work through them, there's a suggestion that I think the things like workshops can be diaried. The 1, 2, 3 for the 5th one and the 7th ones where we're monitoring things. The Secretariat wondered whether they could be incorporated into the outcomes monitoring table, which we have on this agenda and which we talk about every time. So I guess we open it up and perhaps work through each bullet point, and then the group might want to identify whether there's anything that's critically missing. Would that be a way to handle this one, Nobby?
Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, we can go through that by the bullet points.
Yes, and I think we're all mindful that there will be an election in October, so we've got to think about that as we consider these dates. So the first ones was in fact to put something in the diary for the incoming council in November. There was a suggestion that we ask them to review and adopt. That didn't come out of the workshop, but that's the first point. So I guess, is November sensible? Do we want them to review it? Do we want them to formally adopt it? Over to the team.
Some ideas on it, people? Claire?
Mr Chair, I wonder whether in November the incoming council won't be sworn in until later in October. And to say in November would make this one of the very first things. Sure. And be interesting to get your point of view as an incoming elected member, whether working on the charter would be one of the first things you'd want to do, or whether having other parts of the induction program, which is a necessary part of the PGG's review later this year, whether it should just be noted to be held within the first quarter. Be interesting to get your views.
Sure. Yeah, as a first-time councillor, I think that's one of the things that was missing, I guess, when I first came into council. We went through a lot of induction very quickly, but the culture of the charter wasn't there, and so that undermines not the induction process, which is how we physically do things, but it's more about how our behaviour should be as councillors, and how you engage new people into a culture that's already there, and tolerate that. So I think I'm very supportive of having it very early on in the process. Any other views on that?
Can I just say, not as a first-time councillor, but as councillor who's been here for a while, that I think it's actually useful to have it early in the process for new councillors who aren't necessarily aware that there is a charter or exactly what it says. I think, as Councillor Clark's just pointed out, that it's actually a good thing to introduce it at the earliest stage we can. So I'd be quite supportive of November. I mean, I know it's a busy time, but I think all new councillors expect it to be a busy time for induction and finding out about things like the culture and just the way the organisation operates. So yeah, I tend to think now that we have it and it's been socialised to some extent, that it would be good to have it in the very earliest part of the whole induction process.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, Jane, that gives you a steer on that one.
Okay, we've got that one. The next one is a practical one too. You are very busy, so we have to think ahead in terms of diarying sessions. So what was suggested was February, March, and February's about gone, so 2 before October.
So just on a personal level, I didn't attend the last one. I was away. So I don't know what transpired there, but in my mindset, having a dedicated session in July, August is flogging to death a little bit, given that we will be in election mode. It's hard to get a unified behaviour pattern out of councillors when we're all lobbying to retain positions or take each other's positions. I think that the latter one does not have merit for me. I think we'll set ourselves up to fail on that one. Whether you want one before then, it's up to others to decide, because I wasn't at the last one, so I don't know what stage we got to, Jane. Others who there might, were you there, Nigel, or? Yes,
I think
yeah, sure.
I agree with you, Councillor. The July-August one is a bit like flogging a dead horse, because you're going to have perhaps 4 or 5 councillors that won't stand for re-election. I'm just going to have to redo the work later with the new council, so it seems a little bit of a waste of time.
Sure. But you were at the last one. Does there need to be another one going forward, do you think?
March, April, Jane's right. February's probably, although it's only the beginning of February, Jane, but February is probably not realistic now, but March, April, I think would be worthwhile to plan for. I was at the last one, and I think it would be useful to keep the momentum going, but I take on board what the other two have said about that close to the coming election is probably not practical.
Yeah, Nigel, were you at the last one?
Yeah, I was. I just wonder, it's about the timing of it and also the practicality and what we want to achieve from it, to be honest. And given the points the other councillor has said, I just wonder about the...
So have we got to a position in your mind that we're sort of okay where we're at the moment, or do we need some more reinforcement by way of a workshop?
I'm okay.
Okay. Graham's okay. Leslie?
I'd be comfortable with one in March, April, as part of the ongoing bedding in, really.
Okay. So you got a steer on that, Jane?
Yeah, that's good. The next two, one's the induction program, the second one's the professional development program, but the key thing is to include bicultural competency learning and again explicit on culture building. And I think we had a review of what's actually in the professional development program, and I think we've got plans in that area. And the induction program, as I say, is a separate thing, but similar content needed. So just a bit of a steer on these two, I think.
The two next ones, yep. I'll just give an initial view to you on that, Jane. I've got a background in corporate training, and this is a very sensitive issue, this issue of biculturalism, and whether you need to train people up. My view of it is that in induction you should have some initial, not learning, but initial expectation from the organisation on what skill set you want around biculturalism, and then you have a professional development program that allows people to engage where they may not have that. So for argument's sake, would a person that was very strong on biculturalism or has a background in organisations that have already trained them on, would they be compelled to go forward past an induction program into it, and would it be seen negatively if they didn't? And so one of the things about professional development, so it doesn't just become a rubber stamp and people are forced to come, is it's got to be on a personal level. That's what professional development is all about. So having it in induction is great, and then that allows people to self-identify. There's a skill set here that I don't have, and therefore I need to seek some professional development that goes with that. Open to views of other people?
Chair,
Certainly.
the way culture, the actual word competency, you can sit at the meeting and not be competent.
Graham, can you take your mask off when you're talking?
You can sit in the meeting and not be competent. You can
Yes.
post your way through.
Yep.
I'm not too sure how you're going to actually measure that someone actually has sat through and got a competency level.
Yep. And you're quite right. I've been in organisations in the state sector where we've had te reo lessons once a month for about 2 years. And if I went back a year after that, most of the people were still struggling with it. So you're right. You can sit there and participate, but not actually pick it up. So
Perhaps a manual or some such.
well, it's you've got to show the commitment. And what we did in the state sector was we engaged everybody. They had no choice. And the ones that picked it up the most are the ones that really wanted it. And so that's where your professional development comes in. It's a little bit like you could argue that to be in this job, you've got to be able to read a financial spreadsheet. Well, there's some that can't. I know that. But it's not the end of the world if they can't. But it shows that they're inefficient in that area when it comes to debate around finance or whatever. So hence the two-stage. You bring an induction. This is what we expect you to have an understanding of. And here's the opportunity to gain the knowledge if you don't already have it. And I would have thought because our state, the government is pushing really hard on te reo and other things cultural, that I would expect an incoming mayor to sit with each council individually and work through some of these issues and say, what is your background? What is your knowledge? Can you do this at a marae? Can you speak some degree of te reo where needed? And if not, encourage them to go to the professional development.
Can I just say, I think both of these are just too important to have there as part of our culture, to not continue with the path. I take on board what the others are saying. Some people will pick up a great deal more than others, but the fact that we are showing the commitment to having this embedded into our programs, I think, is the principle here.
Can I also add, Nobby,
Sure.
and probably fair to tread a wee bit here, but I think also we have to think seriously about not just our protocols, which is perhaps, if I could minimise what you're saying to things like being able to speak te reo or would you be council on a marae. I think actually all councillors will need to understand actually the increasing and changing arrangements, particularly between iwi and the Act, whether that's the Local Government Act, whether that's the Resource Management Act. When you pile on top of that Resource Management Act reform, or Three Waters reform, as you folk will be well and truly aware, I think there's actually quite a fundamental set of training that any council, and to use your words, expectations, must be at least aware of the trends and understand what's happening so that it can be grafted into their governance process and protocols. So I think actually this is probably a really big area which requires any council, and Invercargill included, to think seriously about how it moves that induction. I would say from that, I would be looking very strongly then, how do you build the individual competency sets and then the individualised development program that you're talking about.
Sure.
I think that's a big part we've got to take into account, Nobby.
Yep, appreciate all that. And that's what I was alluding to, that we do have a changing landscape with central government. And it's not just the Labor government, it will be right across the government sector, that there is an expectation that we have greater competency in some of these areas. So I think you've got to steer there, Jane, on that bullet point and the next one that follows.
Yeah, these two.
Yep.
Now, the next one, that's the one I was suggesting that we need to incorporate into our monitoring table, I think. Well, first of all, I guess the question for the team are, does this make sense? Do you want to do that? And then following on from that, therefore, where do we put it? So the therefore, where do we put it would be the monitoring table, unless anybody's got a better idea.
Seems straightforward, Jane, and the best place for it to go.
Okay, moving on. Next one will, yes, we'll do that. So that's clear that we need to incorporate the learnings into our legacy report. And finally, the last one, again, this is one where we've got a bit of monitoring in place in terms of looking at our council reports and making sure they're fit for purpose, and so on. So we could incorporate that into the same system to make sure that we do that.
Yep. I don't think there's any disagreement with that.
Okay. So unless anybody who actually were at the workshops thinks we've missed anything, we can give a tick to that section, I think. Okay. The 6 monthly review, again, we've already agreed there'll be 2 parts. We'll repeat the quantitative survey and we'll ask Bruce to lead a more qualitative, open-ended review. In terms of 5.1, the questions that were asked last time are attached. I would like to just emphasize to you that when we did them, they were designed in a way that we could repeat them so that we see whether we've progressed. But I do know that Nobby, you in particular, but perhaps others would like to discuss these questions.
Yep.
Our suggestion is minor changes, take out the open-ended ones and make sure they're covered in Bruce's work.
Yep.
But over to the team for what you want to do.
So I'll raise this before Leslie goes, because I know we're getting very close to her deadline. I raised 2 issues with you, Jane, so not everybody will know that. The 2 issues were that I was a little bit nervous about changing too many questions, because then the comparative between the last survey and this survey gets a little bit blurred.
Yep.
But I was specifically uneasy about questions 45, 47 and 48. So they are around comms. And so they imply how well are we doing on issues of communications, and it was asked us to rate or was suggesting that the way forward, and you had to comment on it, was that, and using me as an example, that if I wanted to make any statement to the media, I had to let my colleagues know first, and secondly, I needed to gauge their views, and I'm not sure why I gauge their views, because trying to get 13 members to get some commonality on that would be fraught with problems. I don't understand what we're trying to get out there, and I'm sure His Worship and I will probably both jump to our feet at some stage and say this is a gagging order, but we don't have the comms policy out yet, and so we have the democratic right under the Local Government Act for me to say what I like. I don't need to canvass with others, so long as I express it as a personal view, not as a council view. So those 3 questions leave me personally a little bit unhinged about what we're trying to achieve there and what we're now gauging by way of the questions. So that's just my personal feedback. There was a deathly silence. Yes, Jeff.
Sorry, Jane, can I just ask,
Oh, sorry.
are these
Hang
the
on,
same
Jeff.
questions as the last
Hang
time?
on. Sorry, did you want to contribute there, Leslie?
Oh, just very quickly, what I was going to say is I would also be reluctant to change lots of the questions. I understand about the open-ended questions, Jane, and I agree with that. But the ones that Nobby has raised, I think it's probably important actually to leave them in there and allow councillors, for instance, you, Councillor Clark,
Yep.
to express your view, as I'm sure was done previously. And I think that's part of the comparison between the first survey and this survey. So I'm not sure that we need to take any more out as such. I think it's probably
I
better
guess
to-
where I come a little bit unhinged with that, Leslie, is that, and Claire's laughing at me being unhinged, is that the survey by nature asks you to rank it. It's not a sort of 1 through 7, but at one end it says strongly agree with the statement, the other end strongly disagree with the statement. And so it doesn't give me an opportunity to actually to say the statement's actually wrong. It breaches my rights under the Local Government Act to speak publicly if I want to. So yeah, I was unsure about that. but I hear what you're saying, and we do have an option with Bruce's survey to feed back on that as well.
I think, Nobby, that I tend to agree with Leslie that it would be good to keep these in here, but your point is well made that I think with the absence of a media protocol and it probably being one of the remaining challenges for council as a whole, that would be a reasonable part of whatever we prepare for the qualitative review. So I think I'd argue keep this, and we'll also pick it up in terms of the final review.
Yep.
Yeah, I think sorry, I'll have to go, Councillor Clark, but yeah, I think I would be more comfortable to leave it in so that the comparison between the two stays as valid as possible, but also that it's picked up in Bruce's work, which would then give anyone, including yourself, the chance to have that further feedback.
Thank you.
Sorry, everyone, I will have to go to the DHB.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. Other views around the table on the quantitative survey? Deathly silence.
Well, I think it is what it is, and we need to get on with it. The real danger we have is you being unhinged, to be fair. And that, we've known that for quite some time.
Very poor English. You should have said more unhinged.
Yeah, Councillor Clark, it's not new.
Very accurate, Nobby.
More unhinged.
So get yourself hinged up, my friend, and let's move forward.
Yes.
The only thing I'd want to say is, I definitely agree in terms of changing too many questions, because you lose that comparability.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess this is what, for me personally, I think this is the one area of the Thompson report that we still haven't got a good handle on, which is our media exposure and how that works. We've talked about having a principle of no surprises, which I've always had. I always give councillors a heads up when I'm going to say something in the media, so they don't read about it in the media. But we don't always get that back from the staff media exposure either. So that's an area. Mayor, to his credit, has been very positive in the last 3 or 4 months on media, and we haven't had a lot of negative stuff, so that's good for us going forward. But still some work to be done, and some underlying work that dovetails with the charter as well, I think, about the culture of the way we expose ourselves, both individually and collectively. And while you can do both, I think you sometimes can, not using the word unhinged, but you can unhinge the picture of the collective if one or two shoot off on a tangent. So I think you've got a steer there, Jane, about the leaving the questions in.
If I can just pick up what you actually said, it does dovetail with the charter now, the media stuff. So we've got a good steer there. Now we need a steer on question 44. In the last survey, we had 5, what would we call them, contentious issues. The issue is, do you want to add on another couple or confine them to 2 or 3 or 4?
So Bruce has done a runner for his
I'm still here, mate, don't worry.
his folder somewhere, or he's headed off to something else. Can you refresh the memory of what 44 says, Jane?
44 says contentious issues. How are the council progressing on coming to agreement on the following issues? And then there's simply a list.
Yep.
And I'll tell you the list: Central City redevelopment, the Water Tower, Esk Street, Rugby Park, and Anderson House. That was last time.
And the museum.
And we had the museum. Yep. What do you want to have this time?
Well, I suggested in my feedback to you, Jane, that we should exclude some of those because they're too far off into the distance. Certainly the Water Tower's scheduled for next term or the term after.
Council's made a decision to finish the design and pause that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So remove that one.
Yeah. So the museum is still a contentious issue.
Yeah.
And we're working on that at the moment. And I thought we should include Three Waters as well, the Three Water reform issue.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd have to ask about that one in the sense that I'm not sure council is in control of Three Waters reform. If you look at that list, that's a list of council projects.
Okay.
But Three Waters reform is, quite frankly, a government issue, which might be on their list of contentious issues.
Yeah.
And more mandated as well too, Claire, so there's even less room or scope for discussion. That's not a political statement, it's just reality.
Chair, just perhaps a comment about the question. It's headed contentious issues, but what they really are now are strategic priorities. They were contentious at the beginning, but subsequent to the council agreeing on what priorities were, they shouldn't be contentious anymore. They are your priorities. So I wondered if, at the risk of creating a little bit of a disconnect between the first questionnaire and the second, whether the heading can be changed to reflect what these issues actually are now, as opposed to what they were.
Yes, I'm getting nodding around the table on that one, Jane.
Okay.
And museum in and Three Waters out.
No.
Museum, I'd leave the museum in.
Yeah, that's what I said, museum in, but the Three Waters one is out.
Three Waters is out.
No. I'll just have to put
Yeah,
up some
we've
more
got
signs
them
around
there.
town.
So we've got, what about the water tower? You want that one in?
That's out.
That's out.
out.
It's too far into the future.
So Central City redevelopment, Esk Street.
Obviously in. That's current.
Mr. Chair, can I just say I'm a little uncomfortable about those being in? And the reason I'm a little uncomfortable relates to timing. We're currently consulting on further investment.
Yep.
And it feels a little muddy to be surveying councillors on a matter that is open for consultation and for which you'll be asked to bring an open mind into your decision making.
Yep.
Point.
And I agree with that, Jane. I think we have ICL in place that delivers that, and we are in the consultation process as well.
Okay. Rugby Park. In?
My personal view is that shouldn't be in because it's off into the future still. We've got it operational, but there's not a short-term resolution there. Maybe for next council.
Is that everybody agreeing with that? Yeah, right. Anderson House.
That has been resolved. We are strengthening it. We are making it watertight. The work stops there.
Yeah.
Well, we've really cut it back. Now we've got Central City redevelopment and museum.
And Central City redevelopment shouldn't be in there either.
I'll just take the question out.
I think the museum, well, so Jane, sorry, can you just remind me of the timing for the survey?
March. Now remember, the question is, how are council progressing on coming to agreement?
And is it a multi-choice answer?
No, it's not. It's one of these ones where you scale it, I think.
That's what I meant. It's a scale from 1 to 10.
It's a scale, and it was more about whether the council going through a mature process of prioritising what they want to do.
So Jane, do we have a date? So the only reason I'm asking is because the museum will be included in the draft annual plan, and so my comments about the Central City redevelopment and Esk Street were made because we are consulting right now, and we will be making decisions around the same sort of time. In the same vein, we'll be going out for the draft annual plan around the time that we're answering that question on the museum. The museum is the one that would remain as the most contentious and not yet resolved, but I'd just like to be careful in terms of consultation process.
Can I just add a bit, James? You may be able to help us here because you're the man on surveys. As to whether what would happen if we were to even to exclude this, because it comes under section 10, Jane, which is called complaints. And I take on board why that would have question 44 to being there when you think about the original position we were all in when Richard did his first review. But I think Lindsay's point's well made that we have, I think, removed it from being contentious issues, not necessarily in terms of decisions made, but to being one around strategic priorities. So I don't know how much it still relates to the area of complaints is really the point I'm trying to make. and whether in fact it warrants even having the question in there now on reflection, looking at it. And James, I mentioned your name because I was trying to think of ways in which this wouldn't invalidate our report. I just wonder if we were to exclude 44 in total. Or whether there should be a different question more in line with Lindsay's. How do we deal with our differences around strategic priorities?
I'd certainly agree in terms of the fact that if some of these have already been resolved or in the process of being resolved, well, then the decisions have kind of essentially been made. So if we're going to keep taking things out, then it does lessen the importance of that question, because you're only left with one or two things left. I don't think there'd be any harm in taking it out, but I do think, yeah, possibly rewording it as, well, for some of them anyway, as strategic, then that might get to address some of those that are still remaining. But if so many of them are coming out because they're either too far in the future or have already been resolved, then there's probably no point.
So my reflection on that, Bruce, is that we should take it out and not replace it, because the only, I guess, from my perspective, the only contentious issue is the museum, and it's not actually, the progress we've made to date is not actually what we're delivering in the museum space. I'm probably one of the greatest dissenters, I guess, on the museum issue, but what I see in front of me is actually okay. It's the time framing of the project, and the fact that the storage and the museum demolition are not dovetail. They're one leads from the other, and that's the issue. It's not what we're delivering; it's just the timing. And so I don't see any dissension anywhere else in our ranks on the other projects that we're working through. Anderson's house is on schedule and looks really good. That was the other big contentious one with the public. Those two, museum and Anderson's house.
I think I'd be saying, Nobby, we take it out.
Yep.
44 goes.
Agreed.
Yeah, we got nodding around the table on that one, Jane.
Right, thank you. Sorry, I had to disappear. There was a gust of wind and I lost you. Next thing on
I've heard it called many things, but that's we didn't pick that up, Jane.
Yep. Now, the last survey, this is the next paragraph, we asked external appointees, chief executive, ELT, as well as the mayor and elected members. There was some of the questions were inappropriate for some of these people to answer, and we didn't get a lot of that. It wasn't. I'm stumbling now. I've lost my stride. I think that this time we should just ask the elected members and councillors, because that's who the questions apply to. Not people like me, for instance. Some of them just simply didn't make sense. So what you get was no answer. So you get a very small sample. So the suggestion is that we, and we were able to pull out the data set for just the elected members and the mayor last time. So we're suggesting that this time that's what we do. And we're noting that Claire has the opportunity in the open-ended review to contribute thoughts that she might have.
Sure, Claire.
Mr. Grant and I would be happy to agree with that suggestion.
Yeah, I think we all got feedback, Jane, last time round that some of the ELT members struggled with the survey because it didn't apply to them.
That's right. Okay, well, that's clear. So we've got a steer on that one.
Yep.
And that takes us on to, I think, any more issues you want to bring up on the impact survey? If not, we will confirm the questions back to them by the end of this week, and you'll start to get some comms on this coming out shortly. The open-ended review, what we've done there is summarise the 4 key issues that came out last time. A suggestion that there's an opportunity to raise anything else, and we've already added in something about the media stuff. I know that Claire has a suggestion to add in something, but perhaps given Bruce is sitting here, if I pass over to Bruce to
Yeah.
talk about what the review includes and also how he wants to go about it.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. It's yet another review, isn't it? And I don't want to dismiss it as a result. I think it's actually really important and quite critical. I have a bigger sense of the objective in mind here. And we've also talked about there being a legacy report. So there's a sense in which certainly perhaps more talking in the corridors rather than formally, there's a sense to which we want to see whether the original 4 themes we've got here, and I take on board issues around media, etc., needed to be added in, but whether we have made progress or, more importantly, solved them. And there's an important test. Have we solved them to the point that the department could now express confidence in us? Because I think that's actually the goal that we want by, let's say, 30 June. So that says that I think the basis of my thinking and working with Jane on this is that actually we go back to what were the original problems that we saw with our organisation. And you'll recall these 4 themes came out after we received the letter from the department, and that initial approach that I was asked to take as the independent advisor to council to say what are the issues that we are facing, and these were the 4 themes. So I think we need to have a short process, and Jan and I have been talking about this probably by direct interview with elected members as to whether we've nailed these. That is actually the critical part to it. So in terms of method, we base on this. It needs to be open-ended, so there does need to be the capacity to say, well, we may have moved on these, we may have opened the other issues. The media protocol is clearly being mentioned today, and Claire, I'm aware that I think you've suggested another area be included as well. But I think that's the way we would want to do it. The second part to method is not only by way of direct interview, but the second part is actually, Jane and I are anticipating we should do this commencing at least by the last week in February, so that we've got time to nail this and move it reasonably quickly, so that I think it's early April the PGG can actually adopt a report. So I think those are the sort of key points from my perspective at this stage, Jane.
Thank you. And Claire's suggestion, I know she can make it for herself, but it was, can we include something about what have people learned?
Yes.
From this?
So from my, just to give you some feedback from my viewpoint, Bruce, I think these are still critical issues. All the work we're doing still has the questions of leadership and how we're working together, and whether we have leadership in traditional areas or not. And so I've seen progress in all these areas, and I've seen a little bit of slippage in the media one. So I think it would be helpful. One-on-one is the best way forward for me. I think coming and talking to councillors collectively is not the way forward. If you schedule half an hour for each councillor, and some don't turn up, so be it. But it would be helpful, and I think that would nicely lead into a report that then goes back to DIA, that then challenges them to say, well, we've done as much as we can do in this term, given that we're leading up to the silly season where we'll probably cut each other's throats a little bit on some issues, but are we performing okay? And I get a lot of feedback that says that we've made some significant progress, and including from DIA, but it would be nice to have that formally suggested so that we get some affirmation that we've done the right thing.
I think from department perspective that yeah, certainly addressing those 4 initial issues, yeah, and being clear on what progress that's been made would be really, really important, because that was the whole reason that we're sitting here.
Sure.
So, Chair, can I check something with Bruce?
Sorry, Lindsay, I missed that. Can you just repeat?
Yeah, so I just want to check something with Bruce, if I could. So I totally understand and accept the reasoning for the EAs not, and ELT and others not participating in the quantitative survey. Absolutely valid points there. Just a question, Bruce, as to whether you are intending input from Jeff and myself into the open-ended review.
Yeah, I realised when I just said councillors, I was being a bit exclusionary, because I think actually we say in the paper here, Mayor, Councillor, Chief Executive, and I think it should also include the EAs. Clearly, you guys have been pivotal to our response. And while you're not commissioners, in other words, a direct line to the minister, as it might be the case in Tauranga, you've got a direct line to us. So we need to know what you guys are really thinking. So that would be also pivotal. So yes, EAs must be in my view.
I'm looking around the table for confirmation on that. Yep, getting nodding everywhere on that one, Jane.
Right.
And we just leave you, Bruce, to liaise with Jane to schedule those interviews.
Yes, and I've asked, not in front of Claire, but I have asked that Jane be able to be involved in this, so that we can do this expeditiously, so that we roll it out fast.
Yep. Thank you.
Gee.
Yes, Your Worship.
Yes, I think out of those four, the one that I'm most involved in is the issue of leadership. And it really does need to focus at some stage what our methods will be used to resolve this one and get some sort of consensus. What was the list of the four out of the big four we've identified? Where did leadership come in?
Yeah, I can help you with that, Your Worship. So in the original Thompson report, that was one of the issues raised. He said that we had a lack of leadership from the mayoral role. And so I guess this work that Bruce and Jane are doing is saying, well, it's very easy to sit back and say the mayor's not performing to a certain level, but any good team looks at leadership from different perspectives as well. So from a community perspective, as long as the results are there, and it doesn't matter whether the mayor drives the result or whether there's a collective leadership role, so long as there's not a degree of dysfunction there, at the end of the day, it's all about tangible outcomes. And certainly I've been very vocal about most of the issues on this list, but I can't deny that we've got some very good tangible outcomes for the city and had some more in front of us. So,
I think the other thing Nobby I would add here, by the way, is that these 4 points are the list that we ourselves derived. They weren't Richard's. I mean, there is clearly a high congruence between Richard's initial report and these 4 points. But these 4 themes, I think we have been calling them, or issues, were actually those that were identified by councillors as a collective. So that's why these are so important, because when we started this process in response to the department's letter, these were the issues that were in front of us. And so, Tim, the first one was the absence of effective leadership among elected members. That was felt generally by the elected members as a whole. So there's a very real question: how have we progressed on that? And that's something which this report, this review report, should try and address.
And as you reflected, Bruce, the sooner the better. This sort of discussion coming forward at election time or close to election time is not going to be helpful for us. People have protracted positions around this and will be defensive of comments. So
and that's why I said, Nobby, I think given the program that has been that we have agreed as a PGG, Jane and I would be aiming to have a draft report for the committee on about the 3rd of April or the 4th of April. It's early April anyway, Nobby. So that's the reason we're saying we need to start that this month, so that we can have something credible for you in early April to adopt.
6 months before the election.
And then following from that, the legacy report will come through in May, and the findings will be incorporated into that too.
Sure. Thank you. Any other questions? Everybody shaking their head.
Okay.
That's your report done? We're done, people.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to work through table 6, I
Yep.
don't know if Michael
Oh.
Morris is, I can't
Yes,
see
he is.
Michael.
He's here.
Michael,
He's here, right? Well, Michael
Sorry.
has updated this. There may be questions on it rather than going through line by line.
So as Michael's putting his finger on section 6, I have to leave. So this is yours, Jeff.
Thank you.
I can't afford to be late.
We'll let
Thank
you
you.
go. So are there any comments or questions in regard to table 6, which is the report against outcomes, which Michael's updated? Any questions?
Hoping that's all relatively self-evident.
Yeah, no, it's good. Thanks, Michael. 7, draft work plan. Which is
That's
just
reasonably straightforward, I think, Chief.
budget update under 8. Which is looking well under budget. Project risk from the project directorate. So the risk register, are there any, noting that 3 is a closed item? Any questions? Appear to be none. Can we move on to communications update?
No, there's an apology from Lisa.
Yep.
That she wished the committee to know that the comms strategy has been endorsed by ELT.
Oh, good.
And it's now with the organisation for any other feedback, and Claire will update if there's anything other than that. We're planning a councillor workshop on March the 1st, and that will also inform the training programme for the comms and media stuff.
Any questions around comms? Can we note the next meeting is on the 2nd of March? Are there any other matters? Just note the last part of the meeting went very quickly. Thank you for your indulgence. And I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.